Most men never reach that point. They can't take the pressure. They run back to comfort. Don't be like them. In this video, I'll teach you why solitude is not isolation. It's strategy. You'll learn how to weaponize silence, develop mental dominance, and use being alone to become the most dangerous version of yourself. Stay till the end, because once you understand this, you'll never see solitude the same way again. Most people walk through life blind, not because they're stupid, but because they're never alone long enough to see clearly. They live in a fog of conversation, opinions, emotions, and noise. Surrounded by people, they adopt beliefs that were never theirs. They react, they conform, they follow, and worst of all, they lie to themselves, because there's always someone around to help maintain the illusion. But the man who isolates himself, he loses all of that. The masks crack, the lies melt, and for the first time, he sees what most people never will: the truth. And that's why solitude isn't just a luxury, it's a weapon, because the truth you uncover in silence gives you an unfair advantage over the rest of the world. Now ask yourself, how much clearer would your vision be if you detached from the noise? No friends sugarcoating your flaws, no social media feeding you fake status, no shallow conversations diluting your thinking, just you versus the raw facts. It's brutal, it's uncomfortable, but it's real. And once you face reality, without illusion, you gain something priceless: leverage. Because while others are making emotional decisions, you're calculating. While they're chasing pleasure, you're positioning. While they're playing the role they were told to play, you're writing the script. That's what isolation gives you. Not just time, not just focus, but insight that others can't handle. You start to see who actually respects you, who fears you, who pretends to like you out of convenience. You see the lies people tell, especially the ones they tell themselves. And most importantly, you stop lying to yourself. That's when your power becomes real, because it's not built on delusion. It's built on undeniable observation. Solitude strips away the flattering noise. It leaves you face to face with your laziness, your vanity, your emotional dependencies, your fake goals, your false identity. And if you endure that process without running back to comfort, something rare happens. You no longer need to be right. You just want to see clearly. And that clarity gives you an unfair advantage over everyone still lost in the fog. You'll see patterns they miss. You'll see weaknesses they ignore. You'll see power dynamics unfolding while they're still caught in emotion. You'll become inhumanly effective. That's why so many powerful men in history were loners. Not because they hated people, but because they valued truth more than connection. And truth, unfiltered, brutal truth, is only found in solitude. You can't access it when you're trying to be liked. You can't access it when you're afraid of offending people. You can't access it when you're addicted to approval. You access it alone, when there's no one left to lie to, not even yourself. So if you want real vision, not just motivation, if you want strategic power, not just surface success, if you want to see how the world truly works, you must step away and stay there until your illusions die. Because when they do, you'll come back as something very few people ever become: a man who doesn't just act differently, a man who sees the entire game differently. And that is the beginning of unstoppable power. Most people aren't free, not because they're in chains, but because they're addicted to other people, addicted to attention, addicted to praise, addicted to being liked. They can't function without it, and that makes them weak, because dependency is slavery. Machiavelli warned, "The one who depends on others to stand will fall when they walk away." And in the modern world, that's 99% of people. They live in fear of being alone because their confidence isn't real. It's outsourced. They can't think unless someone agrees with them. They can't act unless someone approves. They can't even rest unless someone validates their worth. But the man who breaks this pattern, the man who chooses solitude over approval, He becomes terrifying because he is no longer owned. He doesn't beg for affection. He doesn't chase popularity. He doesn't wait to be chosen. He chooses himself. This is what solitude does. It forces you to stand on your own thoughts. It forces you to trust your own instincts. It forces you to become mentally self-sufficient. That's the foundation of real power. The ability to move without asking, to act without flinching, and to build without needing applause. Let's look at this practically. When you depend on others emotionally, you become predictable. Your actions are easy to manipulate. Say the right thing, they lift you. Ignore you, they destroy you. This is control, and you gave it to them. But when you choose solitude, you remove their leverage. They can't control a man who doesn't need them. That's why society conditions you to fear being alone, because a man who's comfortable in solitude cannot be governed. Machiavelli didn't romanticize human nature. He exposed it. He saw that most people are driven by need for security, love, status, and those needs are used to control them like puppets. But when you cut those strings, when you no longer crave what others can give you, you become untouchable. This is why kings, generals, and rulers spend time alone, not because they're antisocial, but because they know that power requires distance. Proximity breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds contempt, and contempt breeds weakness. If you want to be respected, create space. If you want to be powerful, learn to walk alone, because the one who walks alone moves faster, sees clearer, and acts without compromise. Let's make it practical. What does solitude look like in the real world? It's saying no to invitations that waste your energy. It's stepping away from people who offer comfort, but no growth. It's being okay with being misunderstood, disliked, or even feared, because you're focused on something larger than approval. It's choosing long nights of thinking, planning, and building, while the rest are lost in small talk and distraction. It's not easy, it's not glamorous, and it's definitely not popular, but it's how the sharpest minds in history built their empires. Machiavelli studied power, not through people-pleasing, but through psychological warfare, manipulation, and ruthless observation. And he did it alone. So ask yourself, can you detach from needing constant attention? Can you walk away from shallow relationships and fake support? Can you trust your own voice more than the noise of the crowd? If you can, you are already ahead of 99% of men, because most will never escape the trap. They'll chase love, they'll chase applause, they'll chase belonging. But the man who builds without needing, the man who thinks without asking, the man who moves alone, that man is dangerous. He doesn't need to be liked. He doesn't need to explain. He doesn't need anything. And because of that, he can take everything. The world worships connection. It glorifies relationships, friendships, constant interaction. It tells you, don't be alone. That's dangerous. That's sad. And that's exactly why most people stay powerless. Let's be very clear. Being alone is not weakness. Being surrounded by people who distract you, slow you down, and dilute your focus, that's weakness. Solitude, when embraced properly, is the birthplace of power. Niccolò Machiavelli knew this better than anyone. When he was exiled from political life, stripped of his influence, and disgraced publicly, he didn't beg to be let back in. He didn't grovel or seek sympathy. He disappeared. He retreated into silence. And in that silence, he wrote The Prince, a cold, calculated blueprint for controlling people, influencing rulers, and navigating brutal political systems. He didn't need an army. He didn't need approval. He only needed one thing: distance from the noise. Why? Because the crowd weakens your mind. When you're constantly around people, you start thinking like them. You pick up their habits, their opinions, their fears. You conform without realizing it. You mirror their insecurities and limit your own thinking. Solitude breaks that. It pulls you out of the current. It lets you see the world from above, as it truly is. When you're alone, a strange thing happens. Your vision sharpens. Your judgment strengthens. You become harder to fool, harder to influence. That's why powerful men retreat before they rise. It's not retreat, it's refinement. You cannot build a fortress in the middle of a carnival. You cannot develop precision while being distracted every 5 minutes. And you cannot build mental dominance when you're emotionally entangled in everyone's problems. Solitude is not loneliness. It's strategic detachment. Most people use others as emotional crutches. They're constantly around people, not because they're building anything meaningful, but because they're avoiding themselves. But here's the hard truth. If you cannot sit in a room alone without losing your mind, you have no power. Because power requires sovereignty over yourself first. And that sovereignty is only tested when no one's watching, no one's clapping, and no one's helping. Let's talk psychologically. Your brain is designed to adapt to whatever environment it's in. So if you're constantly surrounded by chatter, distraction, and superficial emotion, your brain adjusts to that chaos. But when you isolate yourself, when you cut the noise, your mind is forced to confront itself. This is where most men break, because when you're alone, there's no one left to blame, no distractions to numb you, no fake friends to keep you comfortable, just you and the truth. And the truth is brutal. It exposes your laziness, it confronts your excuses, it demands you evolve or be devoured. But if you endure that process, something rare happens. You develop clarity. You gain emotional independence. You become the kind of person who doesn't need approval, who chooses, and that makes you unstoppable. Machiavelli didn't say rely on the people. He said, it is much safer to be feared than loved. Why? Because love depends on closeness, emotion, access, but fear can be built in absence. It can be maintained from a distance. It doesn't require vulnerability. It requires control. People will say, you've changed, you're distant, you're hard to reach. Good, let them talk. You're not building to be liked, you're building to be feared, respected, and impossible to replace. So yes, go silent, disappear, cut the noise, and give yourself the space to build what no one sees coming. Because the man who can master solitude can master anything. You can't sharpen a blade in a storm, and you can't sharpen your mind in constant noise. But here's the truth. If you don't make space for silence, your mind will never become a weapon. You begin to hear your own mind clearly for the first time, and what you find might disturb you. You'll realize how little of your thinking was ever truly yours. You'll see how much of your identity came from others. You'll feel the discomfort of realizing you've been asleep, mentally soft, and that discomfort, that's your moment of power. Because now in the silence, you get to rebuild. You start making decisions, not based on what others think, but based on calculation. You weigh consequences, not emotions. You consider angles, not approval. You think for the long game, not for immediate satisfaction. This is how rulers think. This is how Machiavelli trained himself. Isolated, outcast, irrelevant to the crowd, yet mentally 5 steps ahead of kings. Because the quietest room produces the sharpest mind. Look around. People talk too much because they think too little. They fear silence because silence reveals truth. And most people don't want truth. They want comfort. But power doesn't live in comfort. It lives in clarity. And clarity only comes in solitude. Here's what silence gives you. Focus. Your energy stops scattering. You become locked in. Discipline. You control your impulses instead of being controlled by them. Pattern recognition. You begin to see how people think, move, and fall. Self-control. You become harder to provoke, harder to read, harder to break. You stop reacting. You start calculating. And this is when people start fearing you. Because they don't understand you anymore. You're not emotional. You're not predictable. You're not normal. You've gone quiet and deadly. And when you speak, it lands like a hammer. Because your words weren't born from chatter. They were forged in stillness. This is why Machiavellian thinking is feared. Because it's not loud. It's not impulsive. It's designed. And the average mind, drowned in noise, cannot compete. So understand this. If you want your mind to become lethal, you must separate. You must protect your time, your thoughts, your attention. You must train yourself to endure silence so your brain stops needing distraction and starts producing strategy. Silence is not emptiness. It's concentration. And the man who can sit still, think deeply, and act precisely, that man becomes something very rare. A thinker among talkers, a ruler among followers, a weapon in a world of noise. There's a hidden currency more valuable than money, more scarce than loyalty, and more dangerous when mismanaged than any weapon: time. And in today's world, most men are bleeding it dry because they've surrendered control. They wake up reactive. They jump to messages. They chase dopamine. They meet people they don't need. They make plans they never wanted. They are slaves to distraction, slaves to the agenda of others. But the man who walks alone, he doesn't just control his time. He owns it. And time, when weaponized, becomes the greatest advantage in war, business, and life. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. He didn't have wealth. He didn't have a kingdom. But he had one thing that most rulers never earned: complete autonomy over his hours. While they played political games, he studied. While they argued, he calculated. While they chased favor, he built clarity in solitude. Because here's the Machiavellian truth: you cannot lead anything until you command your time, and you cannot command your time while you are surrounded. When you're constantly around people, you live in response mode. You respond to their moods. You respond to their crises. You respond to their pace, their urgency, their noise. That's why solitude is not just peace. It's tactical advantage. It allows you to escape the emotional contagion of the masses. It lets you operate on your own frequency. And when you control your rhythm, you control the battlefield. Think about it. The man who is always available is always tired. The man who says yes to everything ends up doing nothing well. The man who fears missing out ends up lost in mediocrity. But the man who chooses solitude becomes a master of priorities. He doesn't fill time. He uses it. Every hour is chosen, not given away. Every action is aligned, not reactive. Every move is made with purpose. And that creates a compound effect. 1 year of this kind of solitude, of focused time ownership, puts you 5 years ahead of the man chasing distraction. That's why real power is quiet. That's why the men who shape history don't announce every step. They vanish, reappear, and shift the game. Solitude is the secret, because it gives you room to think, which is a luxury the distracted man cannot afford. It gives you room to plan while others improvise under pressure. It gives you room to build while others talk. Here's the brutal truth. If you can't be alone with your calendar, your thoughts, and your long-term vision, you're not a man. You're a pawn in someone else's plan. Solitude isn't about isolation for the sake of drama. It's about choosing to live deliberately. You don't waste hours on small talk. You don't entertain pointless opinions. You don't chase people who drain you. You eliminate, you organize, you execute, and the result, your work becomes sharper. Your presence becomes rare. Your words start to carry weight because people can sense you're operating on a different clock. They'll say, "He moves different. He's always ahead. He never seems rushed." This is why solitude matters, not because it looks cool, but because it buys you time, real time. The kind needed to separate from the herd. So if you want power, start here. Cut the noise, own your mornings, block your hours, stop explaining, and vanish often. Because the man who walks alone thinks alone, and builds alone doesn't just move at his own pace. He becomes the pace others have to chase. So if you want real vision, not just motivation, if you want strategic power, not just surface success, if you want to see how the world truly works, you must step away and stay there until your illusions die. Because when they do, you'll come back as something very few people ever become, a man who doesn't just act differently, but a man who sees the entire game differently. And when you reach that level, you won't just be watching power, you'll be wielding it.